I'm Shahar Azani, and welcome to this special episode of Eye on Israel. The fight for Israel's public opinion is a reality we've grown accustomed to seeing these days almost on a daily basis. However, this is nothing new. Through its many years of independence, ever since the Jewish state was reborn in 1948, it faced wars, boycotts, and acts of terrorism, all while facing continuous bias and one-sided condemnation in the international media and in various global fora. Fuel for Truth is one unique organization whose mission is to educate and empower young Jews to stand by Israel and the Jewish people and to equip them with tools to do so. Fuel for Truth, FFT, was born in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, which, as we all tragically recall, spawned a host of conspiracy theories implicating Israel and the Jews in the massive loss of life on that fateful day. These conspiracy theories still take place today. Horrified by this ugly wave of anti-Semitism and foreseeing how this new world would result in increased hostility towards Israel and Jews in the United States and quite frankly around the world, a group of young secular Jews, all under the age of 30, many of whom lost loved ones when the towers fell, knew they had to do something. These individuals were not political activists, not even particularly active in the Jewish community, but as some of New York City's top club promoters, up-and-coming business executives, and rising stars within the entertainment industry, they believed the mainstream Jewish organizations were not adequately responding to the new problems facing the Jewish community. Hence, they focused on dedicating their time, skills, and resources to developing a revolutionary model to educate young Jews about Israel, the Middle East, and how to effectively combat misinformation surrounding the Jewish state. The result is FFT's flagship boot camp program for young professionals, which has educated thousands of participants across the United States. Today, I am pleased to be joined by two great friends, pillars of the FFT social movement. Ron Wasserman is a senior vice president at Signature Bank and a volunteer chairman of Fuel for Truth. For nearly 2 decades, Ron has dedicated himself to numerous Israel-related endeavors, including teaching FFT's bootcamp program, regularly meeting with high-ranking members of Congress to educate them about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and supporting high-impact organizations such as the American Friends of Israel Navy SEALs. Originally from Syracuse, New York, Ron resides in Great Neck with his beautiful wife and 3 incredible sons. Fuel for Truth Executive Director Justin Ellis fell in love with the land, people, and history of Israel when he moved to Tel Aviv, lucky him, after college. But his deepest love came and remains when helping others establish their own relationship with Israel. Unlike traditional Israel advocacy educators, Justin utilizes his background in communications and user experience to facilitate effective engagements that transcend social and political differences surrounding the conflict and the complex history of the Middle East. Justin has provided workshops for thousands of young adults throughout the United States. He has spoken for numerous organizations, including the Jewish National Fund, Jewish Federations of North America, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Israeli American Council, and CAMRA. A graduate of American University in Washington, D.C., Justin lives with his incredible wife and amazing dog in Connecticut. Ron, Justin, thank you so much for joining me today here at the JBS Studios in Times Square. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Shahar.
So I have to tell you something. I'm sure our viewers are watching the show and are incredibly impressed by you, but the first question that's resonating now with them is, how can we manufacture more of you? What made you into who you are? What element in your personal background made you into these effective pro-Israel leaders?
I think for me, it was a very organic upbringing. My mother was born in Iraq, and she made Aliyah in 1950, 1951 to Israel. My father's an only child, actually from Washington Heights.
Oh, wow.
My father meets my mother in Israel one summer doing a medical summer abroad, brings her to this country, and I grew up, as you stated, in Syracuse, New York, with no Wasserman family. My entire family was Israeli, because my dad's an only child. And so I grew up my life spending summers in Israel. And so I got this very organic dose. It was never in your face. It was, we're going to Israel. This is where my Savta and my Saba were, all my aunts, uncles, and cousins. And so I got that very organic Zionism as I was growing up. And as I've told the story before, it was the Second Intifada where my Zionism changed. And it was the moment where the idea of soldiers made a wrong turn. They were killed in the street, and you had the terrorist with his bloody hands outside the window.
Ramallah.
Correct. I was in college, and Israel changed at that moment for me. And the second thing that had a profound impact on me was Birthright, but in a different respect. Birthright was my 15th or 16th trip to Israel. Because my mother was Israeli, I never went on an organized trip to Israel.
Right.
So I qualified. I saw Israel through the eyes of 39 Jews, mostly from Kentucky, Texas, and Atlanta, because I couldn't get on the New York City trip. It was a waiting list, and I was bombarding this organization, Shorashim. I need to go, I want to go, and there's no room for you. So they said, do you want to go with these people from Kentucky, Texas, and Atlanta? I said, sure. And experiencing Israel through their eyes, they'd never been before, and they came from different communities, had different upbringings, had a very, very profound impact on me, and even further entrenched me in and started my path to where I am today.
But I have to ask you something before we get to you, Justin. You mentioned interacting with Israel. You were in college when the Second Intifada happened. For sure, you would have seen the anti-Israel movements. As a Jew, not to mention as somebody who's been to Israel with Israeli roots, taking an anti-Israel position would have made you super popular in college, and yet you have to have some courage, some stamina to make the right moral decision. How were you able to make that? Like, where were you in that moment? How did that work for you?
So it's interesting. I'm the last person who you would think would be sitting in this seat. I grew up in a small town called Manlius in Syracuse, New York. I went to Union College. There was no Israel anything at my college. In fact, I couldn't even tell you if there was a Hillel or a Chabad at the school. I was that removed from it. Like, Israel was always, that's where my family is, that's where I'm going. So I didn't experience that personally. I started to see that after I graduated. Started to get involved in Fuel for Truth and started to see what was going on college campuses. Fortunately or unfortunately for me, that never took place at my college campus. I never saw any of that.
Okay. And so it allowed you kind of veer, even though I do have a hunch that even if it did happen, you would have taken the right course.
I think it's safe to say, Shahar.
Justin, super educator for Israel.
I try.
How does that work? Like, tell us a little bit about your background and what made you into who you are today with Fuel for Truth.
Sure. I would say similar to Ron. I also am almost surprised to be sitting in the seat having this conversation with you. I grew up in the New York City suburbs. Israel was not part of my life growing up. If anything, actually, more than that, being Jewish was not part of my life. It's not to say I grew up in like an anti-Zionist household or anything like that, but my Jewish experience in my youth was effectively defined by being forced to go to Hebrew school 3 times a week and hating every minute of it. So by the time I graduated from Hebrew school, I was allowed to get, let's call it parole after my bar mitzvah. The next 6, 7, 8 years, I had nothing Jewish in my life whatsoever. Israel was not an interest to me. Like, I knew it existed, I knew there were a lot of Jews there, but it didn't mean anything to me. By the time I get to college, I realize, like most people, when they leave home, you reflect on the fact that you grew up within a bubble, within a bubble, within a bubble, and you come across different views of your own, different individuals, different personalities. So that made me a little more politically curious. And on top of that, I randomly get placed with 2 roommates who both met each other while studying at Hebrew U together. And they introduced me to this thing called Zionism, which I was not really familiar with. And
so they introduced you to that concept while you were in college. I'm so happy the introduction came from a positive point.
Same. No, I would say more than that. They gave me an avenue to connect to my Jewish identity on a level that I was able to at that time. That where I did not have a spiritual connection, or let's call it an observancy connection, the idea of connecting with my history, my identity, the Jewish people, the land of Israel, that spoke to me very directly and gave me the opportunity to, let's say, re-enter my Jewish identity or onboard into a deeper Jewish identity that I never had growing up.
What was appealing? What was most appealing about this? What attracted you to it?
You know, in some ways, I would have to say it was really just the fact that I grew up in a community in which being Jewish was nothing that was all to celebrate, or I just didn't see anything empowering by it. There was nothing that screamed like strength and koach to me. And when I was introduced to, let's call it Israeliness, for all of its quirks, I was like, these people are healthy. I want to be like these people. There's something to this that I want to dig deeper into. And that was the beginning of my journey. That was, the catalyst.
That's a great point also for our viewers to remember. We're using words here like attracted you, made you passionate about, and this warmth, this kind of heat, sometimes is missing in the cold interactions when it comes to Israel, even in our own Jewish organizational world. Which leads me to the most important and first relevant question here for Fuel for Truth for our viewers. Tell us a little bit about Fuel for Truth. How did it come to be? Why did it come to be? We mentioned it a little bit in the opening, but we want to hear the details of exactly how, what, and why.
So you did a very great job in the opening, going over the history, our origin story, so to speak. So I'm not going to rehash that. When I got involved with the organization is when we really started to be more active in providing the programming. Doing, instead of maybe one boot camp a year, doing several, which led then a few years later to us being in many different locations. But really what it was the demand. There are so many Jews out there who want to support Israel. But the conflict, if I could describe it as this dense fog, occupation, settlements, genocide, apartheid, where do you begin? What does this all mean? What is true? What is not? And so we are the organization to dip your toe in. The way I would describe it is that fog will start to lift. Now, are you going to be a Middle East expert when you finish our class? No. But will you understand these, conspiracy theories that, that the pro-Palestinian movement is peddling? No. You'll be able to understand fact from fiction. You'll be able to have a smarter conversation when it comes to Israel. And most importantly, you will be able to have your own opinion based on fact and reality, and be able to articulate the way you feel about Israel very clearly and very confidently.
How refreshing to speak about facts and reality.
I know. It's like an oxymoron when it comes to this topic.
Especially, I know it's been experienced relatively, it's a new experience here in many ways in the US, but in the Middle East we've seen the existence of disinformation and misinformation for too many years with it, when it comes to especially Israel and the Jews.
Correct. Well, the real problem we face today, Shahar, is anti-Semitism. Right, which is this nebulous that continues to form and change. We're a people, we're a religion, we're an ethnicity. Now it's Israel. And I think that's what a lot of the people in the middle who maybe want to support us but feel compelled to support the Palestinians, they don't understand that by supporting the Palestinians with apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide, that's modern day anti-Semitism. And the whole anti-Israel movement, and I think that's what's lost on a lot of Jews, is that this is what this is all about. Right. When people say around, how do you explain all these lies? Well, for guys like Justin and I, and I'm sure you too, it's pretty easy to explain. I mean, it's called anti-Semitism, but what are you going to do about it?
Right. Here is one question that I bet you so many of our viewers have now. Today we live in a sea of Jewish organizations, a multitude of entities whose mission is to fight anti-Semitism and educate and empower. What makes you guys so special?
I would say one of the main differences is that we very much proudly call ourselves an anti-Hasbara organization. And when I say that, I'm not besmirching other organizations or other movements that are looking to educate and empower Israelis and Jews about their own identities and their histories. I mean in the sense that Hasbara as a methodology requires, as the Hebrew word translates, to explain, right? It effectively rests on the premise that you don't know enough. However, if you listen to me long enough, you're going to know the facts, you're going to know the truth, you're going to know what's real. So therefore, listen to me and I'm going to tell you where you got this all wrong. However, we know that doesn't work. People do not radically change their minds overnight about things that are dearly important to them, that make up their understanding of the world. And also, additionally, it's not compelling to just tell somebody that they're wrong. Part of what we do is really about how do you facilitate this process? How do you facilitate a conversation with someone to get them to consider their own ignorance perhaps, or even to dig a little deeper into their views without making them feel threatened, without making them feel stupid, without making them feel like you're out to get them and you're just some big know-it-all and they are just dying to get your information, is how do you actually have these conversations? civilly, effectively, persuasively, and all the more particular when someone's understanding of reality is not the same as your own. That very much, I think, defines what we do in Feel for Truth, and certainly what separates us from a lot of different organizations.
I would add one more thing. It was beautifully articulated by Justin. We are also a social movement. We're a social organization. As you know, Shahar, when our class is done, whether it's in Miami and LA or New York City, we go to the bar and we have a drink or two. And we talk about what we were talking about in class. We talk about stuff we weren't talking about in class. People become friends. Justin and I see on Facebook, guys, girls are traveling the world together. And they met at boot camp. You might be right, you might be left, you might be center, you might have Democrat, Republican, but there's this one common denominator in each boot camp class. It's a love and support for Israel. And people are able to put whatever differences they may have aside based on that love. And so I wouldn't want to sell short the social aspect of what we're doing. And we've also married off, we've lost count, but many, many young professionals have gotten married as a result of meeting in our program.
You're talking about the Israel education component as the body. You're mentioning the social element as the soul. I heard you talking before about this term. I just want you to elaborate a little bit about it for our viewers. What is Party for Truth?
It's a good time that I remember most of them. So part of the boot camp experience is not just the socialization after class when we go to a local bar. It's a lot of what we do with these classes is the groups themselves put on these larger events that really help bring together not only the cohort that graduated together, so it's a culmination, a celebration of their achievement, their graduation, so to speak, but on top of that, it is also a great opportunity to recruit for future classes, to spread the word about who we are, what we do, in what's just inherently a fun, exciting, and very organic way.
Here again, we go back to your secret sauce. It's people who enjoy being with one another, who have fun together, and who engage with Israel in that framework, which is truly a great way of addressing the issue, because it's not just another course or another seminar, it's a whole social experience around Israel. I can say so because I've had the pleasure of experiencing it myself, speaking with various groups all around the country, and it's beautiful to see your way of engaging that generation. Do you have a specific age group that you target?
So the boot camp class targets young professionals. Mid to late 20s, early 30s is the boot camp program that we're doing in Miami, New York, and LA. But what's happened over the last few years, since I've moved to Great Neck, we've always realized that we're missing arguably a more important target audience, which is the kids getting ready for college. Remember, Fuel for Truth, we're getting them post-college.
Right.
And we've always known that we needed to be in there beforehand, but getting a 16, 17-year-old to commit is near impossible. Right. We field calls every month. We want to bring you to our community. But that's the easy part. Getting the kids to commit and show up is very difficult. But we've been able to pull it off in Great Neck. So to answer your question directly, our target audience really is through the boot camps, mid to late 20s, early 30s. But we've started to do a lot of work with high school kids in the Maryland area, in Great Neck, in Westchester.
But when you think about young adults today, through, let's say, young leadership cycles, circles of different organizations, it's not Israel focused. It's not educational focused mostly. In your case, what you're saying is we're going to attract these young adults. We're going to give them a good time. It's going to be wonderful to be together. But there is a lot of material. There is a lot of essence in what you do. So maybe let's take a moment. Anybody who thinks to themselves, that boot camp, what does it really include? Dive into it a little bit. Enlighten me on what is the material that you're providing. What do you teach those young adults?
Sure. So, I think as you already articulated, it's very multifaceted. There's the educational component, there's the social component. But when we dive into the history, it isn't just a means of exploring events of the past, where we talk about how the Jewish condition changed due to the Zionist movement, how Hebrew sovereignty was reconstituted in the land of Israel for the first time in 2,000 years, how the Six-Day War changed the reality of the land, but also the region. A lot of it is also, how do you connect to a story that's bigger than yourself? That we are not just evaluating figures of some abstract past, of some land that we are not connected to. This is our story. This is your story. You are a link in an intergenerational chain. And very much in the way in which those who spearheaded the Zionist movement, who achieved our liberation from the British Empire in the 1940s, at one point, they woke up like any other person. They chose to be something bigger than themselves. They chose to connect. And that's really what we're inspiring people to do when we go over this history. And as a result, people can bond to it a lot more organically and on a much more deeper level to understand that this is not just something else, this is very much them, and that they have an obligation, a responsibility, and frankly an opportunity to be the next link in that chain of what had already come in our past to really shape our future.
So you cover the past, also current issues, conflict, BDS,
correct,
on anything that pertains to those elements, those part and parcels of Israeli modern history, and to some degree pre-modern history.
Yeah, a rundown of content would be, Justin does an incredible job, and I would argue one of the most important things we do in our boot camp is communication. We can teach you all the facts and the information.
Right, so the facts are one element.
Correct, but how do you communicate with, as he was saying, an individual who maybe doesn't like you because of your religion, or just that maybe that has nothing to do with it, they just disagree with you. So there's that aspect. But then, Shahar, we dive in, because as we get older, we're getting farther and farther away from the history. What happened in 1948? Who stole the most land from the Palestinians in the war of 1948? It was the Jordanians. So we go through, how was the state created?
How many of our viewers knew this? How many? Just ask yourself for a minute. Take a moment to just enjoy and relish what we're hearing now. Yes, sorry.
So we do the history because it's very important to understand what happened in that war and some of the other, the 67, so on and so forth. But then we really bring it full circle to the accusations that you hear today. And you are more familiar with them than most people. Ethnic cleansing, land theft, apartheid, occupation, settlements. We literally have...
Which to us could be ridiculous because we know the facts.
Correct.
But to many people out there who've been accustomed to hearing this, not just yesterday, but throughout years of media coverage and international politics, correct, and suddenly they have to counter their own existing truth when it comes to Israel.
So we have a PowerPoint, a deck on all of those topics, so that when you're done with our program, you'll understand, again, as we stated in the beginning, fact from fiction. What are the settlements? Where are they? Who lives there? What happened in 1948? 750,000 Palestinians did indeed end up outside of the borders of Israel, but how did they get there? The other side would tell you that the Jews were responsible and that was their policy, but as you know, there are over 2 million Palestinians living in Israel. 25% of the population of Israel today is Palestinian. If ethnic cleansing was the call of the day, then what happened? Did Israel do a terrible job at ethnic cleansing, or maybe there's something else going on?
Yeah, based on the anti-Semitic slur, we shouldn't be that incompetent, should we?
Yeah.
But
we're pretty good at it. So how did we end up with 25% of our population?
Exactly. The fact that you convey the information, but you also create some sort of social structure.
Yeah.
And that social structure goes to serve the long-term relationship between the individuals within that specific boot camp. And I can imagine, the graduates, and I can imagine, people who've gone through the different alums who come together under different auspices in a way that when they encounter an issue, they can pick up the phone or reach out
correct,
to you or, to their peers.
To their peers, we get Facebook messages, emails. It's always great when they reach out. We could share some stories if we have time later, but we have seen some pretty unbelievable things happen post-boot camp along the lines of what you're talking about. It's just that community that we built, whether they've seen each other in a year or 2 or 3, it's like your cousin that you haven't seen in 3 years in Israel. Right. It's like you were there yesterday.
The other thing I think, I noticed with you from the very first moment I got to know Feel for Truth and really got to know the way you work is your smile. Whatever you present, you smile, even during class, and the way you present the material, the way you serve it is always with this, the positive attitude of we're telling you these horrible things to empower you, and we're going to teach you how to cope with these things. And first of all, you're not talking about the outside, you're talking about the inside. Let me first of all allow me to settle the issue for you. And once you're content with what you've heard, you can proceed to move on. Not in a way of, here are the talking points, go ahead and do it, but it's a much more profound, and I would say psychologically binding way in the sense of long-term commitment. Is that your sense as well?
That is, and you brought up a point that I think is worth discussing, is we can give you all this information, but as Justin stated earlier, regurgitating these facts is ineffective. We want people to understand what really happened so that they themselves know fact from fiction. True. But really what we want the individuals who complete our program is to ask questions. Because when you're talking about these arguments, they really don't hold water. So let them come to that conclusion. And if you know enough of the history, the facts, the reality, you can ask some pretty interesting and what you or I might find humorous questions to get that individual to understand you can support the Palestinians. In fact, I don't think anyone sitting at this table has a problem with that. Just be authentic about it. You know, don't support the Palestinians when rockets are flying from Gaza and forget them for the next 2 or 3 years. Don't scream and yell at Israel, but Hamas has done nothing wrong.
Right.
Don't talk about what's going on in the West Bank without first pointing the finger at the Palestinian Authority, who controls the Palestinians' lives living there. So we really are more, to your point, here's the information, but there's a certain way to convey it. There's a certain way to have a dialogue with someone on the other side.
Which is a perfect segue to my next question, which is about, you know, Justin, we mentioned your background in communications. Anything you want to share about the communication methodology? Well, how do you view this and how do you convey it to the participants of the boot camp?
Sure. So a lot of what we do, not only in terms of what we're teaching, but certainly how we deliver it, are part and parcel. And it's really a way that we reinforce the content in that sense. You know, you just said that, you know, when you noticed us speaking, we're always smiling, right? Part of that is actually part of the process of engaging with someone, is that, you know, if you want people to come to these conclusions on their own, which is really the only way to effectively do this, you have to make this a pleasant experience for them. They have to enjoy being around you, speaking with you, especially discussing these topics in particular. And if you can't do that, I don't care what you know, you're not going to persuade anyone of anything. So a lot of that really does begin with you as a person. You know, most people think, unfortunately wrong, that their most valuable attribute as an Israel advocate or as a Jew or as an activist, you know, whatever label you want to put on somebody, is how much they know. That's not it. It first and foremost begins with how positively you are perceived and experienced as a human being. Your ability to facilitate the types of relationships you want to have with someone, that they're going to be more open to what you have to say. And that begins with being likable. Obviously, that's very difficult when you're talking about something that is very emotional, something that's very near and dear to you, something that is very foundational to your understanding of reality and your sense of self. You know, people think fight, flight, or freeze is just what happens in the physical world. That's not true at all. It happens also emotionally, psychologically, right? When we are emotionally threatened by things that we don't like, that upset us, that we disagree with, we engage in those behaviors too. A part of what we're teaching in the class when it comes to the communication portion especially is how do you control and regulate those emotions rather than them controlling and regulating you.
Wow. You are the message. That's what we always tell the people, right? You are the message. When whatever it is you want to say, it's who you are. Mm-hmm. So no matter what comes out of your mouth, the way you can carry yourself around is exactly how your message is going to be perceived. 100%. And I can tell you that goes hand in hand with Israel, and it really goes hand in hand with both of you. I mean, listening to you, hearing the way you articulate your claims, your vision for FFT and what you're doing every day, it's quite inspirational, and I'm thankful, you know, for such forces that exist in our community, because it's nothing that you see every day. But I do have to ask you something, and I'm sorry if I push you on this. Some people may look at this and say, oh, these are ideologically lenient, these are rightists, these are leftists, these are this, these are that. What about politics? Does Fuel for Truth identify with either this right wing or left wing or centrist, or how do you view this? And at the same time, who are the people who are coming to the boot camp? Are they mostly this way or another?
I'll start with the people that come to the boot camp, and Justin could probably give some good insight on that too. Across the spectrum. Right, left, center, and the way we try to balance it, and it's difficult, and sometimes we do it better than at others, but we just try to stay with the truth. Because again, part of our mission statement is, We don't want you to have Ron Wasserman's opinion, Justin Ellis's opinion on that, or Fuel for Truth's opinion. We want you to have your own opinion. Here are the facts. If you still want to be angry at Israel on one of these issues, after having understanding and a comprehension of fact and reality, we're not going to get angry about that. Just come from a place of truth. Come from a place of honesty. So we really try to keep politics.
What do you mean honesty? Facts?
Facts, honesty.
Reality?
So we try and stay away from politics. Bibi's prime minister, Naftali Bennett's prime minister, Benny Gantz's prime minister. It doesn't change what happened in 1948. It doesn't change what happened as a result of the Six-Day War. It doesn't change what's happening on college campuses with the BDS movement. All these issues and anti-Semitism can be free of politics. So we try and just walk that middle line the best we can.
So just for the sake of building on this issue, you must have had cases in which you had somebody in the audience who was completely fed for such a long time with the anti-Israel propagandic movement. Not the legitimate criticism of Israel, but the anti-Israel, like you mentioned before, ethnic cleansing and all of those horrible words that are sometimes used vis-a-vis Israel. Now they're in class, they're listening to you, they must have questions. The fact, do they bring themselves to ask these questions in the presence of all of the other participants? How do you react? And maybe you can share an example of two of such instances that you've had in the past, just to enlighten us, to understand the environment, the ambiance.
Sure. So one thing I want to expand on that we were just talking about is really the fact that I think one of the most amazing testaments to our success, especially in this current era, right? We're living in an age where terms like fake news, alternative facts, right? This is part of our political and social lexicon.
Right.
The fact that we are able to facilitate these groups where these young professionals, some are ardent one-staters, ardent two-staters, some don't even know the difference between them or have a completely different understanding of what those terms mean. Some don't even have their opinions that they formulated, left, right, center, conservative, liberal, whatever label you want to put onto it. And I think that it really comes from the fact that when we're introducing a lot of this information, when we're unpacking a lot of these issues, it's not about telling them this is the only way to think about it, this person's right, this person's wrong. A lot of that begins also with them appreciating and valuing that we're introducing a way for them to think about this in a way that's outside their current worldview. Some that, let's say, are very supportive of Israel and some that may be a little critical. However, it's the whole point that you're trying to understand where people are coming from. What are the strategic interests and positions of different parties and different actors for you to make yourself a more sophisticated consumer of information, media, and certainly to have the conversations you want with other people. And the reason why I introduced that is I think that was one of the reasons why we've been able to have success with certain individuals who I'll give one example.
Please.
We had someone who, we have people fill out an application for class, right? It's not like, here's the place, here's the time, just show up. Right?
So that's how it works.
Yes.
You have to go to your website, fill an application, you review the application, you get back to that individual, you're accepted, here is the commitment, you come to the boot camp.
Exactly. And so one person mentioned that they were friends with Linda Sarsour. And, it's the internet. People write crazy things. People write things that aren't necessarily true. But, this person, and this is what we do as part of that application process, people are posting their social media profiles so we can kind of verify who they are. And I'm looking at this person's Facebook page, and lo and behold, there are pictures of her and Linda everywhere.
Right.
Real photos. And in her application, she said, you know what? I've been spending a lot of time in this space with Linda Sarsour, other members of the Women's March movement, and their views on Israel and Jewish issues, I'm a little skeptical about where they're coming from. And so I just found your class. I'm interested because I want to hear what you have to say compared to what I've been hearing from these people. And it was just an amazing experience to have this type of person in the class who I think very inherently and understandably was coming in with as much of an open mind as possible while also being a little skeptical. But the result was someone who really walked away saying, you know what? This group of people, this population that I've already been socializing with and absorbing information from, I think they're missing a lot of key things, and sometimes I don't even agree with them at all now. And that was an amazing turnaround that even I wasn't totally expecting.
Wow. And have you ever had a different case in boot camp where somebody completely, or took them, how difficult is it for people to absorb new facts and to really, we're used to living in a world where there is no convincing, right? I'm very much entrenched in where I am. How are you able to, instigate that shift with your audience?
So I'd like to share maybe a story about an individual who came to the class, completely secular. He was basically forced to go into the class by his buddies, was serious with a non-Jewish girlfriend, and again, no kosher, no chagim, no holidays, no nothing.
Right.
And this individual goes through our class and gets invited to a Shabbat by his classmates halfway through the class. One of the guys was on the Upper West Side, I'm going to do Shabbat for the class. Come. He'd never been to Shabbat before. He does a Shabbat class and he's blown away by the sense of community. He had never done Shabbat before. This was his first time. He was in his mid to late 20s. Then his path takes him to Aish. And I didn't know any of this was going on. I lose track of this individual. And maybe a year or two later, an Israeli who had done the class says, hey, Ron, haven't seen you in a while. Let's do lunch. And this individual's in town. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen or heard from this guy in a while. We go meet at Russ and Daughters at the Jewish Museum on Fifth Ave. And this individual, not the Israeli, a secular kid, he comes in with a black velvet kippah, tzitzit, white shirt, black pants. He was in town from Jerusalem.
Oh, wow.
This guy left his life, left his girlfriend. He became Orthodox, and the whole arc of his life changed as a result of boot camp.
But again, you were talking about social connection.
Yes.
His buddies invited him for Shabbat. He had these interactions. So this secret sauce, this special sauce of this sandwich, that's FFT, is the ability to take the core information and then add to it the tools of interaction and combine it with those social interactions. You must have some good stocks with the Almighty up there when it comes to shidduch, right?
I think a few times over. And Lord knows Justin and I need that.
Yes.
The other thing, you asked the question about maybe someone coming in left, right.
Right.
We see it more on the right, where people come in and, the facts actually kind of do lean a little bit more right when you break down what actually happened. And so we get people coming in here saying, oh, the Palestinians aren't real. They want to come into a conversation with brass knuckles, a baseball bat, and a shotgun.
Right.
And I think we do a pretty unbelievable job at saying, all right, take it easy, calm down. You may not be wrong on everything, but here's some new information. And regardless of right or wrong, that's no way to communicate with someone who disagrees with you.
Right.
You're going to push them farther away. You're going to make them more angry. And as Justin said, you want the person you're talking to feel good after they're done speaking with you. And when you come in with that baseball bat and your brass knuckles, they're not going to feel good about the conversation they just had. And so we've had a lot of success with those. We get a lot of those in the class.
I'm hearing a lot of how in the course of our conversation. I mean, the what is definitely there for everybody to see, but there is a tremendous amount of how that really is a very big part of FFT. Am I true, correct in identifying this?
Yeah, I think let's call it the depth that we take the conversation about certain conflict issues in a way that I mentioned before is meant to encompass, let's call it the Israeli mythology of it, but it's also meant for your individuals and participants to understand why others have a different opinion than they do about that.
And then how to interact with those opinions.
Absolutely. And one thing that I have to say, as much as we're providing clarity, we're also creating complexity. And it's meant for people to have a little more humility to say, you know what, I'm a human being, I'm born at a particular time, I live in a particular place. I'm never going to know everything about anything or anything about everything, right? You can learn from different points of view that may frighten you, that may scare you, that you may disagree with. You can find grains of truth within them, and it's meant to empower you further.
I love this word. Humility. It's not a word you hear often in our space.
Not enough anyway.
And I think this is crucial to understand the humility before those things you don't know. And I also love the complexity. I can tell you that personally, my vision has always been if I'm able to come before an audience and not convince them necessarily, even though I would love that, to sing Hava Nagila around the picture of Golda Meir, as long as they come out and say, you know what, it's not as clear cut as I might have thought attending an anti-Israel rally. Things might be a little more complicated. But then you mentioned the whole idea of Jews and non-Jews. Have you ever had non-Jews participating in boot camp?
We've had quite a few. Certainly
Yes.
they are not the majority, just given the subject matter and who we're catering to.
But to that we'll say in Israeli, lama lo, why not? Okay, but sorry,
That's
having said that.
So, I mean, one person who stands out, someone who actually came from Iran, non-Jewish guy, Muslim guy, found our class through a friend and was just interested in learning more about Israel and Middle East. And
Again, through a friend, I want our
And
viewers to
we thought
remember.
this guy was IRGC. Like at one point, we were like, this just doesn't add up. But
no, and this guy ended up loving his experience,
IRGC.
and he kept coming back for more. I mean, and certainly just to talk up some of the benefits of class is that, you know, we understand that learning, whether it's about Israel or anything else, is not a destination, it's a journey. And for someone like Ron and myself, who, when we were participants in boot camp, we kept coming back after. We've obviously taught this program numerous times, and we are evolving, changing, growing every time that we do it. We understand for participants, it's just the same way. So there's always an opportunity for graduating participants to come back, to refine their knowledge, to warm up a little bit better, you know, to get those details back. But the reason I bring that up is that this individual was one of the biggest repeat offenders that we ever had.
Yeah.
And it was really special to see that this individual was keep on coming back for more. Not just for the education, but also because this is where all his friends were now.
correct. His whole social network became his Fuel for Truth class, and he kept coming to, once you graduate the program, you're free to come to any future boot camp. And this individual, as Justin stated, he kept coming back. I think he's probably got the record for attending the most
Might.
post.
And these, you know, in general, these have been the responses by non-Jews who attend the class. Positive interactions.
Absolutely.
They were
Yeah.
open
Absolutely.
to hearing. I think it's the fact that you maintain such a balance.
Yes.
But also, again, I go back to the how. The fact that you make it social. It's not just the material; it's the people around you. It's not just a session; it's when we get together later and, you know, are happy to talk to each other about that and so much more. It's coming together with other alums. Where around the U.S. are you active at the moment?
Currently here in New York City, South Florida, we're alternating between Miami and the Fort Lauderdale area, as well as Los Angeles, West LA. We're definitely looking to expand our operations and bring boot camp to more cities. You know, like Ron said about different communities asking us, you know, can you bring this to our high school students or to our shul? We get this all the time from young professionals, whether it's Chicago, Phoenix, the Bay Area. They want this too. It's really just a matter of making that happen.
Yeah, it's actually engaging with Israel and having so much fun doing it.
Yeah.
You know, we mentioned Jews and non-Jews. Was there ever any interaction with Palestinians?
So I had a recent experience that I thought was very meaningful for me personally. You know, I'm someone who, you know, like I mentioned before, we're always constantly evolving when it comes to our views of the world, how we relate to different attributes of our perception of reality, if you will. You know, I always joke in class when I tell people, like, if you were the same person that you were back in high school, that you thought about the world the same way, you had the same opinions, you'd probably hate yourself. And that's not to say you were a bad person back then, but if you never grew, if you never had to do the work to become something bigger and something more complex, like, that's a disappointment, that's sad. And so, you know, I don't think I could have this conversation with Palestinians back then that I can now. And I recently had the opportunity to do with these two Palestinian sisters from the Hebron area, and this was set up through a mutual friend. And we had a wonderful conversation about different aspects of the conflict, about Jewish identity, how Palestinians understand and experience their own history and the status quo in a way that, at the end, we both wanted to talk to each other more, not less. And not only do I think that is a key for better conversations outside the land when it comes to having these difficult you know, discussions, but also for Israelis and Palestinians themselves. And I know that's easier said than done, but I do think that is a key for our future.
There is a key for engagement. You know, I've seen it myself with outreach from faculty members who are of Palestinian origin, who are intrigued just to hear more of where I'm coming from and, you know, what is my side of the story or perspective. And I think it enriched both sides. So it makes me very happy to hear you guys say this. I want to ask you again, for the sake of our viewers, hopefully you are where you are now and hopefully in many more places in the near future. If I am sitting out there in Idaho or Phoenix or New York or LA and I want to get in touch with you and I want to maybe initiate a boot camp in my city or gain some materials from you, how do I get in touch with you guys?
Our website.
Yeah, fuelfortruth.org is the place to go. Also info@fuelfortruth.org if you just want to email us directly. But on the website, it explains more information when it comes to signing up for boot camp if you're a young professional in your 20s and 30s. But if you are a teenager, if you are a college student, if you're just a concerned parent or grandparent, also on our website we have information about the workshops that we offer, and obviously we'd be happy to work with them to come to their communities and help.
So, and you say that as far as the kind of immediate projects, the first thing you would do in any place would be the boot camp.
Correct. If we were going into a city,
yes,
planning expansion, we would go into that city with our flagship program, the boot camp, which would be anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks, targeting young professionals in their mid to late 20s, early 30s.
On a weekly basis.
On a weekly basis.
During which they will first encounter the information itself,
Correct.
the materials, then learn their communication skills of how to
Correct.
convey that material and interact with others. No specific political lineation, just wherever you stand, come and hear the truth and learn how to communicate it.
Correct.
Actually, first they're getting a kosher dinner, and then we go into the stuff.
It's
part of the experience.
It's part of it's the food, it's the fun, it's the company, and it's the content.
Well, what more could you ask for?
Yeah,
Shahar?
what more? The truth is that even though you guys, assume it as a given, it's not a given.
Yeah.
When you go out there and you see the programming is not always as, congenial, hospitable, warm. We are used to living in a reality where so much information about Israel comes with these robes of gloom and doom. We live in a terrible state. The Palestinians, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, who wants to interact with an entity that's, about to cease to exist any minute from now. And that's, we know, is not the truth. There is so much more to Israel than those immediate threats. So it's not that you're not showing those threats. I think it's all about how you present them and providing this balanced picture of what Israel is like today, what are the threats it's facing, what are the opportunities, and while doing it in such a relatable way, right? Attractive, fun. These are all terms that are very much alive in FFT's core.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm happy I got it, and I hope that our viewers did, because really there is, it's vital and important that we maintain a connection, both on a Jewish level and an Israel level, with our young adults. There are a lot of organizations out there who engage with, donors deep into their careers. There are others who engage with, high schoolers or middle schoolers, or, if at all, Jewish kids go to Jewish day school. Many of them don't. We know that a lot of Jews actually attend the public school system. But the fact is that there is a little bit of a gap of information when it comes to young adults, and it's also a great opportunity to meet people.
A huge gap. It's a huge gap.
Yeah. So it's good that we have FFT to address this gap. This has been truly incredible. I want to thank you for taking the time and share FFT here with us at JBS, with our viewers and with everyone who is interested in listening. And I hope that there will be much more interaction coming your way in this regard.
Thank you, Shahar, for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ron, Justin, that incredible passion, devotion for Israel and for the long-term vision of how to empower tomorrow's youth and Jewish generation today. It's been an inspiration listening to you. And to you, our viewers, I'd like to say this. FFT, Fuel for Truth, is a great example because it goes to show us all that if we will it, it is no dream. If you choose to take an initiative and make a difference, don't just sit in the living room couch and complain about this, look at the TV and say, how come you don't have the facts? Do this. Roll up your sleeves and get to work. Go to their website, just like Ron and Justin and all of their friends. You have the opportunity to positively influence Israel's image today. I hope you all do so. I'd like to thank you all for watching and see you next time as we cast an eye on Israel. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.